It all started with a very simple idea. Tell the stories of how successful middle market CEOs made it to the corner office. I'm Brant Handley, founder and managing director of Resource Options International, or ROI. We're the USA's premier executive search firm focused exclusively on empowering middle market companies to attract, hire, and retain A players while transforming top executives' careers and lives. ROI's Into the Corner office is dedicated to discovering how middle market CEOs advance their career, and we're making these remarkable and sometimes quite unbelievable stories available to you for the very first time. Listen and learn about the challenges they've overcome, the interesting people they've met along the way, and the lessons learned that steered these executives' unique journey into a middle market corner office of their own. I know you enjoy these CEO stories as much as I've enjoyed recording them. So thank you for listening today. And if you like what you've heard, rate us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm looking forward to you joining me on the next great middle market CEO adventure into the corner office. My guest today is Marty Strong, CEO and Chief Strategy Officer of LGS Management Systems. Marty is a decorated retired Navy SEAL officer and the author of the new business leadership book, Be Nimble: How the Navy SEAL Creative Mindset Wins on the Battlefield and in Business. After 20 years in the military, Marty spent 7 years as a successful investment advisor with UBS. He is now the CEO and Chief Strategy Officer of the LGS Management Group, an employee-owned multi-company enterprise focusing on training and healthcare. Marty Strong, welcome into the corner office.
Hey, thanks for having me, Brant.
Great to have you here. I know we talked a couple of months ago, and it's wonderful to get reconnected. And just coming out of the Thanksgiving weekend, this will air a little bit later, but let's start with that. How was your holiday weekend?
Well, not too bad Thursday and Friday, but I was working on a lot of things Saturday and Sunday. So
it was a good time to catch up, isn't it? I always like that down times over the holidays and getting caught up on some things. And some say it's a bad work habit, but I always like having the quiet of the office. How about you?
I do, and I like being a little bit ahead of the curve instead of behind the curve.
Right,
so I spend some quality time on early Saturday and Sunday mornings catching up and planning my next 4 or 5 days.
Awesome. That's great. Well, listen, we always like to kind of start in the beginning, and that's, of course, where you grew up and your early family life was like. So tell us a little bit about that. What part of the country did you come in, and, brothers and sisters, mom and dad, what was that all about?
Well, I was born in Sidney, Nebraska. That's the far left tip of the panhandle of the state of Nebraska.
Yeah.
And my father worked for the Department of the Army as a civilian. And after a couple of years, we moved to Omaha, which is the largest city in Nebraska, on the opposite side of the state. And I stayed there till I was about 10, had a lot of odd jobs and kind of menial projects that would allow me to earn an allowance, et cetera, from my father and mother, who were both Depression era Iowa kids. So
sure,
real strong work ethic in those early years. And my brother and sister, both younger, and we all moved to Japan.
Oh, wow.
When my father was selected to go to U.S. Army Command Center in a place called Camp Zama. So we were there for 4 years.
Wow. What ages was that, Marty?
See, I was there from 10 to 14.
Wow, cool.
And very interesting time, very enlightening, a lot of exposure to Asian culture, Japanese culture. So I had a really good time. I even climbed Mount Fuji when I was 14. So
yeah, great.
It was a good experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And then came back to the U.S. after that?
Yeah, my parents got divorced at the end of that 4 years, and my mom and I and my brother and sister came back to the same house in Omaha that we had rented while we were in Japan. And we were there, I guess, for about a year, and I went to go live with my father, who had been reassigned to Honolulu, Hawaii.
Oh.
So I went to high school in Hawaii for a couple years, and then he was reassigned to U.S. Tank Command in Detroit, and I moved and finished out high school in Grosse Pointe. So that movie Grosse Pointe Blank is about my high school.
Yeah, Fantastic. Great. Well, what an interesting life, and not a real typical one, obviously, from a kind of a U.S. childhood standpoint. What were some of the influences that you had there? I mean, mom and dad, obviously. Were there other folks that kind of inspired you? You obviously chose a military career, at least for the first part of what you've done. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. But who were some of the folks, and what were some of the lessons learned from mom and dad and others during that period?
Well, I give a shout out to my mom and my dad in my book because while they were not entirely impactful on my life after probably age 5 or 6, they were kind of hands-off parents. Again, Depression era. You figure it out. You get out there and get a job. You go take care of it. And I'm not here to babysit you kind of personalities.
Right.
My mom was very much a voracious reader and taught me to read when I was very, very young. And my dad although he had a degree in accounting, was a self-taught um, student in a lot of different things, religion and philosophy and sociology and a lot of other
Cool.
kind of the human sciences. And he had me reading those books when I was a teenager in Hawaii to get my allowance at that point. So I had to do an oral book report on the Hindu Upanishads and the Book of Mormon and the Bible and the
Wow.
Quran and a lot and Spinoza and all kinds of different things that I would have never been exposed to.
Yeah.
So the combination of those two things, learning to read very, very young and then being taught the value of self learning and seeking out wisdom in books, that's primarily what I got from my mom and dad. Other than that, it was primarily coaches, athletic
Yeah.
coaches. I was
Yeah.
in sports from 8 years old on, and they were much more of a driving factor in shaping the way I kind of saw the universe and what my possibilities were, as a person.
What sports did you play, Marty?
I played football. I played baseball one season. I stunk. I wrestled. I played football pretty much all the way through from about 10 years old to my senior year in high school, and
Yeah.
played basketball. I think 3 or 4 of those years between middle school and senior year in high school. I swam the whole time. I was
Oh,
AAU competitive swimmer,
nice.
and that's about it. I think those are the main sports.
Sounds like you were probably a pretty good student too.
I was, but yeah, I think the whole point of learning how to read so early, most kids, at least back in those days, most kids were struggling with just trying to figure out how to read,
Right.
and most of the content of learning in all the early grades came out of books.
Right.
So if
Right.
you were already ahead of that power curve, you were learning quicker and you were learning more and learning more easily. So that gave me a leg up as a student. I was never good at math. I had to get passing scores all the way through to my graduate degree, but I was never a fan of it, and I never had, I don't think, a very good mentor in that. So I always saw it as kind of the my my nemesis every time I started. Well, I don't care what grade or what college program. I knew that was out there waiting for me, and I didn't enjoy it.
Right. What about entrepreneurial things? I mean, you didn't have a classic upbringing, given the fact that you lived in Japan and then I guess Hawaii for a while. But did you have the paper route and do things as well that earn that extra spending money beyond the allowance?
Yes, and all of us kids in Nebraska were all the children of either World War II era or Korean War era
Right.
parents, and the fathers expected the sons to do all the chores around the house, usually for free or a very small allowance. And then you were told to get out there and earn pocket change, and it was almost like an order. It was suggestion. So mowing people's lawns, raking leaves. Did a lot of looking for bottles because in those days you could turn in bottles
Sure. Right.
and uh, and you put all those things together. So that starts to teach you the value of work. It teaches you work ethic, but it also teaches you that you can work stupid or you can work smart. So you start to hone in on the things that are going to click and work and have high leverage outcomes. So
Right.
by the time we went to Japan, I sold light bulbs door to door on the housing base. I
Cool.
again mowed lawns. It was a push mower, but you could check it out for free. Mowed lawns. I had a paper route, and I think through that time, and then when I came back to the United States, I ended up working in farm co-ops, detasseling corn, picking
Hmm.
beans, baling hay. Worked in warehouses. Um, worked in landscaping companies and lots of different restaurants. So I was always at least one or two jobs in at all times.
Yeah.
Paid for my first and second car cash from all those odd jobs before I joined the Navy.
So is that where most of the money went to saving for the car, or were you doing other things as well? That
Always the car.
yeah, yeah.
I had a $750 1964 Rambler, the first car that could barely move, and I had to jump start it every time. I had to connect the battery to the starter and all this other stuff with a wire. Wasn't really impressive on dates. And then I traded up for about a $1,500 car after that. So, and you could buy cars like that back then. They don't really have
Sure.
those available now that all my 5 kids grew up. I realized that they don't have cars like that anymore. At least they're not
Right.
legal to drive.
Right. So came back, did you finish up your high school? Was it a kind of a foregone conclusion that you'd go to college? Did you, obviously go to the military right away? Tell us a little bit about the decisions you made kind of coming out of high school,
Sure.
what you did next.
Well, oddly enough, between Japan, Nebraska, Hawaii, and Detroit, I ended up almost in 4 different schools throughout that high school time frame. And everywhere I went, the credits from the prior high school, for the most part, didn't convey. And I'd have to take all core classes again. So when I graduated, I was told that I had about 5 years worth of high school credits, and and I had a 3.9 grade point average. So at the time, though, there wasn't very much as by way of counseling. Parents are still kind of the ones that push their kids to think about college. My parents
Sure.
never talked about it. My dad, who went to college on the GI Bill after the Korean War,
Right.
decided that the best thing for me and my brother was to join the military like he did and figure stuff out, but he wasn't going to take care of college for us. So
Mm-hmm.
that pretty much meant for me, I was either going to become, to quote him, a bum or join the military. I didn't want to be
top two opposite ends of that spectrum, right?
yeah, those are the two doors. Bum or be a guy in the service. So I joined the Navy as the default to being a bum.
Right.
And my brother eventually joined the Navy also after me, my younger brother. And that's how I got into the Navy.
Yeah. Cool. And the SEAL program, did that come naturally to you? Did you get recruited for that? Tell us a little bit about that direction.
Well, the SEAL experience has changed radically over the years. There's a lot more money involved. Back in the late 70s, there was the force was very small. There was only about 300 or so SEALs. Now I think there's like 3,200 active duty SEAls. There was only SEAL Team 1 and SEAL Team 2, and then there was about 5 or 6 underwater demolition teams.
Right.
So what the Navy didn't need was more SEALs. So there wasn't any recruiting. There was no recruiting budget. There was no recruiting effort. You couldn't go to a recruiting station and ask about them because they didn't know anything about them. And essentially it was word of mouth, either from existing SEALs telling other people, or people on ships, active duty sailors, hearing about the programs and trying to figure out how to volunteer for them. So that's the normal way back then to get in, unlike now. So I went to radar and air traffic control school because my father had been a radar operator in the Navy during the Korean War for 4 years, and that's the only job I knew about from listening to him.
Sure.
And I finished that school, and through an error or mistake, administrative mistake in my orders, I ended up, instead of going to a ship in the Mediterranean, as I expected, I ended up at underwater demolition SEAL training in Coronado, California, which is part of San Diego.
Yeah.
And so I did not want to be a SEAL, did not plan to be a SEAL. I didn't even know what a SEAL was. At that age, a frogman to me was anybody that put a scuba tank on his back. I didn't know anything else about that. I got there, they acknowledged that there was a mistake, and then they talked me into staying. So that's how I started in the SEAL teams.
Wow, fantastic. And about 20 years in the military. And were you a SEAL the entire time? And
I was.
They keep you in that? Yeah.
I was an enlisted SEAL for the first 10 years.
Yeah.
And I got my undergraduate degree in business during that time frame. And then I applied and was selected for Officers Candidate School, and then finished the second half of that 20 years as an officer in the SEAL teams.
Awesome. So you were training then and developing, and wow, what a transformation. I'm sure the SEAL team went over that. It changed over that period of time, I guess, right?
Radical change. It started out with the very first training I went through when I arrived at SEAL Team 2 was 4 months of pre-deployment to Vietnam training, which Vietnam was already over by a year and a half or so, but they didn't know what else to do. They saw themselves as a jungle fighter unit. And so they just kept doing the same thing. So I went through, we were even using Vietnamese um, language, the same stuff that they were teaching people when the war was actually going on,
Wow.
how to tell people to get down, put their hands up, drop their guns, come over here, get over there, hurry up, and and then within 4 years of that first experience, we had expanded the missions into Arctic warfare. I was, skiing 300 miles north of the Arctic Circle. We were doing complex ship attack training, using all kinds of advanced navigation technology underwater. We were all kinds of things, mini submarines, and
Yeah.
and eventually very complex and advanced skydiving techniques, including something called HAHO, where you open up your parachute at high altitude and fly in a formation using navigation boards, um, and land as a team in a space as small as the helicopter pad on an oil rig.
Wow.
So yeah, big change. We
There
went
it is.
from Flintstones to Jetsons in about 5 years.
Good way to describe it. And it's been, gosh, almost 25 years since you left, or about that. You left in the mid 90s. But you spent 20 years there. And if you could kind of encapsulate, what are two or the three of the key leadership lessons that you learned, coming out of SEALs that you think has been, most appropriately applied to business? Because you've obviously been in business now a little bit longer than you had been in the SEALs.
I'd say the one that I keep falling back on, and I talk about it in the book, but I almost named the book "Be Humble" instead of "Be Nimble," and that is to have intellectual and emotional humility. That the intellectual side is, don't be a know-it-all. Don't believe that your past successes have actually given you some great superpower over what's happening now and in the
Right.
future. It's appropriate, it's applicable, but the context may have changed and the competition may have adjusted, and so you're going to get your butt handed to you as a leader if you lean on that. And the same thing from an emotional standpoint, that you think not that you know everything, but you have a feeling of superiority or
Mm,
control that is kind of an illusion, or the opposite of that. You've had, some hard knocks and you're carrying
yeah.
that forward every day. You're thinking, well, I can't do this. I don't know how to make decisions, and either one of those emotional states, either the high where you believe you've got everything under control and
Mm,
you're a winner all the time, or the low where you don't have anything under control and you're going to lose no matter what you do, those are not useful. So you learn that in the SEAL teams
interesting. Yeah.
through repeat stress training, and
Huh.
where they allow you to fail, they force you to fail, they set you up to fail, and then they critique you minutely in all of your decisions, actions, judgments. Um, and then you get a sense of yourself, and you get a sense of that rule that I just said. That if I rely on the past and I lean on the past, I'm gonna fall.
Right.
I'm not gonna do well. But if I look at everything open-minded, if I get my eyes open, my ears open, and absorb new information, and don't have a parochial view of everything, I can I can make some really good decisions based on
Mm,
what reality is.
yeah.
Because reality is what we're all leading through. We're not leading through the past. That's over.
Right. Cool. So you came out, decided to go into financial services. Was that, by accident, by design? How did you kind of choose that field? And Legg Mason, I think you started with. Is that correct? Coming out of SEALs?
That's right.
Yeah.
Again, not kind of a non-linear path. I wanted to go to law school. I was getting close to the end of my 20 years in uniform, and I decided that I was going to start up a little boutique operation, put my shingle up in a small town up in northern Maryland that my brother had moved to, and kind of reconstitute the family and the kids and all that. And a friend of mine who had just retired about 6 months prior to me, a Navy Captain SEAL, came by the command I was in, talked to somebody, found out that I was going to go to law school when I got out, came in, grabbed me, and said, "You're not going to law school. Let's go to lunch." So at the end of 2 hours, he talked me out of going to law school. I'd already taken the LSAT and everything. I was
Wow.
well down that path,
Yeah.
and he talked me into going into the financial services industry, because he
Huh.
said everything you're talking about means you want to be an entrepreneur, you want to run your own show. You don't need to go the 3 more years of schooling for that. That's
Hmm.
just a waste of time. So he was with a company called Alex Brown, which focused on initial public offerings. They were in Baltimore. The founder of the company's son had gone through SEAL training when I was an instructor, so it seemed like I was going to be a shoe-in that they'd bring me in. But I started evaluating Alex Brown compared to other companies up in Northern Maryland. Legg Mason had more of the entrepreneurial business model. So I ended up going and interviewing with Legg Mason at length, and then I joined them, and it was a good choice. You're pretty much on your own. You started from a cold start. They didn't give you any clients. They just get in a room. Here's a phone book. Go for it. And and that's the moment where I realized that the rule I told you about that I thought I'd learned in the SEAL teams was back haunting me again, because I had gone from being a very successful SEAL officer to being the worst salesperson in the history of Legg Mason, because they didn't teach that anywhere. They didn't teach it in my undergrad or my graduate program. So yeah, I started in a very dark place, calling anybody and everybody I knew who knew anybody that had ever sold anything for a living, because I was living off of commissions and fees. There was no salary. So
right. And did you move into management there, or did that come a little bit later in your career?
I did not. I interviewed for a branch management position, I guess about 2 years in at Legg Mason, but right around the same time, UBS was trying to establish a footprint in the same market to go head to head with Merrill Lynch, and their proposition was, take your book of business, the high end book of your business, and focus just on the high net worth clients that you have, and go fee based, which means I manage my money differently, smaller, more control, and a lot more fun for me. And so I went through the interview process. I did not get selected for branch manager, and I also accepted the UBS offer. So I went with UBS at that point, and finished out the rest of that 7.5 years with UBS, doing high net worth wealth management essentially, and managing a portfolio.
And did you have a team at that stage, or still?
I had 3 people reporting to me that I had to hire and pay for. UBS had the same kind of approach as Legg Mason. You just paid out of your fees and commissions for everything: marketing, sales, people. The only thing they covered was the back office support on financial products and services, and the footprint, the actual leased space, and furniture and everything. You covered everything else. So I had 3 people I had to manage. They'll probably tell you they had to manage me, but there were 3 sharp ladies, and they helped me expand my business even more, because up until joining UBS, I'd been a one man show, and that was kind of hard. Analyzing the markets, picking stocks, deciding what the portfolio balance should look like, and also trying to meet new prospects, retain the clients that you have, doing reviews, all of that at the same time with just one person, and answering the phone every day. That was a little bit much.
Right. And then the next pivot, pretty significant one. I think 9/11 had a little bit to do with that, but you went into the security and counterterrorism consulting practice. Tell us again about that, kind of change, and what was the motivations around it, and how did that kind of fit in your longer career plan?
Well, I didn't have a longer career plan. I think anybody listening to this is starting to get the gist of that. Starting from when I joined the Navy, and didn't have much control. So I think fate was calling the shots. And I was in an office with a regional vice president of UBS when the planes hit the towers in New York City that morning. And I looked, when the second plane hit, I just turned to him and I said, "We're at war." And he didn't understand what I meant by that, but I knew. And I could just envision in my mind everybody getting recalled, all the SEALs getting pulled back in. I'd been through that drill so many times, and I just felt like I needed to put the jersey back on. I needed to get back in, help somehow. America had been attacked. I was in my early 40s at the time, and I didn't feel like an old man, but I did have a disability from a parachute accident, and they didn't really need guys like me. They needed fighters.
From an active duty standpoint.
So I started reaching out and consulting on asymmetrical warfare, counterterrorism, anti-terrorism, because really the flip side of being a SEAL is being a terrorist. I mean, everything that terrorists use, is pretty much all they have at their disposal, which is pretty much all special operations rely on.
Yeah.
They, sneaking and hiding and camouflage and coming in from a different angle that nobody's expecting, walking in looking like a cleaning a cleaning crew for the building, but you're actually the reconnaissance team. All those kinds of things. So you can kind of think like they think, and that's where my
Right.
value was initially. So most of the consulting was related to threat profile development for how are the bad guys going to hit us, and then it was very specific to certain locations. So I did the 2004 Athens Olympics, and which all that work started in 2003, but
Yeah.
and then some U.S. facilities. So that felt like I was kind of in the game a little bit. At least I was trying to stop bad guys,
Right.
even though I wasn't in uniform. But I ended up getting into some contracts and into the government contracting world because of that, and getting my clearances back and starting to get into helping the U.S. government directly.
Right. Right. Cool. And you did that for a few years, and then I think another pivot from to XE Services, correct? Was that your next mountain to conquer, so to speak?
Yeah, so that I was the senior vice president and business development, kind of marketing guy for multiple companies. Some of them were government contracting companies, some of them weren't, and it was a wide range of commercial operations. There was aviation, there were vehicle companies,
Mm.
there were just all kinds of different companies. So the nice thing about that experience was I started out as being kind of a business development marketing guy, but I also became the evaluator fix it guy.
Mm.
So as companies were being acquired, I was sent to try to figure out what their brand was and kind of clean that up. But I ended up being the subject matter expert about these companies from an operational mechanics standpoint,
Mm.
and that allowed me to give a lot of feedback to the senior officers of the company. And then I also got involved in strategic planning, strategic writing for each of the different companies, and then eventually holistically for all the companies. And that exposed me to kind of what works and doesn't work in strategic thought, applicable thought, not pie
Right.
in the sky kind of hopes and dreams thought. And all of that, plus, a lot of other lessons learned, kind of prepared me when I left there for becoming an equity owner, a partner in a very small government contracting firm
Uh-huh.
at the time called Lynx Security. Now it's called Lynx Global Solutions, or LGS.
Right. Yeah. And that's where you are today.
Well, I'm in a holding company, management holding company called LGS Management Group,
Mm-hmm.
and we're an employee-owned company, and we have two different business operations. One is the original government contracting company,
Right.
and the other one is a health company. It's pure commercial health services delivery. So between both of them, a little over 600 employees, and doctors and nurses on one hand, and former military, former law enforcement, people doing primarily high-end tactical training and leadership training on the government side.
Yeah. Yeah. So a lot of federal contracts, or is it mostly working with government agencies that work with the private sector, or give us a little bit more,
Sure. So
breadth?
in the case of Lynx or any government contracting company, what they do is they see published requests for proposals from any government agency, and within Department of Defense, any of the different services, and there's a lot of them. And I'm talking about there might be 100 to 200,000 of those requests for proposals right
Right.
now on their system. So there's no lack of work, but then you have to align yourself with what they're asking for, and there's a whole set of rules and profile bona fides, et cetera. You have to have actual past performance doing the work, which is why it's difficult to get into government contracting.
Right.
You have to say I've done something, and you have to show proof, and you have to have references. But if you've never done it, you can't bid. So,
Right.
but you can't bid it unless you've done it. So that it's a tough business to break into, but once you get in there, it's not too bad, especially if you do a good job. And what they do is these government agencies have all these things that they don't do inherently that they want the private sector, the industrial base, to either do or solve for them or
Mm.
build for them. And we're all people on the Link side, so all we do is staffing solutions and management kind of design of staffing solutions. So when we bid on a proposal, we bid on a request for proposal. We put a multi-page proposal. It could be anywhere from 30 pages to 500 pages along with the bid, the dollar value,
Right.
and we submit it. And at that point, it's an auction, and the government evaluates the quality of the proposed solutions and the quality of the cost and the price that's presented. And once you've been awarded it, they're usually 5-year long contracts, and
Wow.
you just implement the plan.
Yeah.
So that's what Lynx does. The healthcare company is called Legacy Care, and the healthcare company is a pure commercial operation. It doesn't have government contracts. It wins business one healthcare environment at a time.
Right. How would you say your leadership style has kind of evolved over time, particularly since the days that you left as a SEAL to now, running a fairly significant middle market company?
Well, I think the short answer is I really see the genius in Mike Tyson's quote of everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the face. When you start out as a leader, and I think I started out the first time I was actually in charge of anybody, I was probably 23 years old
Right.
in the SEAL teams, and you you have a chip on your shoulder. You've moved up in rank. You feel like you're smart enough to be a leader. Other people say you're smart enough to be a leader. You've been given a title in the job description, leader. And then you turn around and start acting like what you think a leader's going to act like, and you've got all these people that are older than you and wiser than you and smarter than you and more qualified than you staring at you. And I always looked young. I mean, when I joined the Navy at 17, I looked like I was 10 years old, and when I joined Legg Mason at 37, I looked like I was 24 years old. So it's been a hard, long road for me to look credible.
Right.
But the audacious kind of I know I can do this. I can control everything by the wisdom and the power of my leadership. That just goes down, in flames in the beginning. At least it did for me.
Right.
And I started really listening to the feedback, and I got a lot of good feedback, especially in the SEAL teams, because they'll just get in your face and tell you stink. They'll point out exactly. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, you're being run through official training, and you're being evaluated as a leader. So as I moved up through the senior ranks as an enlisted SEAL and then as an officer, you're running through these practice rehearsal tests and reviews and analysis of you, the team you built, your subordinate leaders, and how you're interacting with them, how you're interacting with the higher command, how are you communicating, how are you explaining what's going on, the judgment calls, etc. And you just get more humble and more humble and more humble. And that's the evolutionary process I went through. Yeah. And then, of course, getting out of uniform, I was immediately humbled. So I've just pretty much nowadays, I see what happens. I see it coming. I take a deep breath. I clear my mind and start trying to understand it based on the information I have right in front of me. And that's how I've evolved as a leader, because I can make decisions quickly. I'm a pretty good decider. But the analysis is usually, for most people, is based on the past. They do it kind of a rear view mirror approach. What have I done before? How did I fix this before? How did somebody I saw fix this before? I'm just going to apply whatever somebody did before to what I see in front of me. And I've seen that fail so many times that now, rather than having a knee-jerk reaction to pull back, reach back and pull something from the past, I start asking lots of questions of the people that are standing in front of me about what's going on right now. And that makes me a much better leader. And I think I'm making decisions that are cleaner and clearer and more appropriate to the reality that I'm facing and that my team's facing.
Yeah, cool. Well, how would you describe kind of the uniqueness or maybe what's different about LGS culture, from a company standpoint?
Well, I think and for the senior leadership of Legacy Care, the healthcare company, I think it's the same thing. You select for culture. It's hard to develop culture after the fact. And what I mean by that is, if you hire in people that can dunk a basketball, and then you hire in somebody that can't dunk a basketball, they can't align with the culture.
Right.
And if you bring in people that are cheerful and approach everything with alacrity and a willingness to roll up their sleeves and join another team, join a project, become a leader, become a follower, whatever, that group, that kind of that hire, if you put enough of them together, that creates that culture. If you bring in people that are optimists, that creates that culture. If you bring in people that are pessimists, that creates that culture. So culture is really first managed, manipulated, or created by the hiring process, and making sure that the front end of the HR, I guess, funnel
yeah.
is fully understands that and most of them don't. Most of them looking at the technical alignment with
qualifications,
the job posting against the resume and all that.
Right.
And that's great. That's a prerequisite, but the main slam dunk hiring factor for Links and for Legacy Care is that they fit. And the fit for us, because we're growing all the time. Legacy Care has been growing leaps and bounds. I mean, incredibly fast over the last couple of years. We started 4.5, 5 years ago in a 25-mile radius of Richmond. Now we're in 8 states, and you can't have a bunch of mopey people and a bunch of pessimists and glass half empty kind of personalities around if you're moving that fast and changing that fast. You basically need people that are happy to play pickup basketball, and they see a virtue in being successful at playing pickup basketball. So that's what we try to do. And then we try to maintain the culture by, establishing and maintaining a sense of humor from me on down. It's okay to fail. It's okay to fail in public. Right. We all learn something from failure, and as long as you keep that as a constant, they eventually believe it. And and then even sometimes if you end up accidentally hiring in somebody that doesn't have those personality traits or character traits, they kind of evolve into it a little bit because they see everybody's not worried about job security as much as they're worried about contribution.
Right. Yeah. Cool. What do you personally look for when you're, interviewing people and the folks that you're going to invest in and hire?
I look for a sense of humor. I ask a question, usually what stresses you out at work? And if I get a really stressful response, as opposed to, a chuckle and I'll tell you what, a kind of a sense of humor response, I realize that, they see stress as a real, kind of battering ram in their life and in their work. It's probably what they wake up thinking about. It's probably what they go to sleep thinking about. And that's hard. I mean, in an organization that's growing all the time, I'm looking for people that can handle stress. And I'm also looking for people that are you kind of a natural leader if you think about it. There was an old kind of a joke in the teams. You don't want to be that one guy out of 7 rowing that boat in BUD/S in basic SEAL training who's complaining about the cold water and are we there yet? Because one of the first rules in that particular elite unit is understand the reality, suck it up, and contribute. Right. So you want to have people that are all humans get stressed, but they see stress as a part of the job, and they have kind of a healthy perspective about stress. And then if they have a sense of humor, that gives them a way to compete and battle against the negatives of stress. That's kind of the first thing I look for. As a matter of fact, when I sit in on the interviews nowadays, that's pretty much all I'm focusing on is, do they have a sense of humor as a key indicator of comfort in the interview process, but also, how are they going to be comfortable with the dynamics of change and scaling and all the other things that are going on in the world and affecting businesses. And the second thing is, what is it that stresses them literally? And that's always telling too, because if it's something that isn't going to be helped by joining us, then that's a good thing for us to know ahead of time. Like, for example, if somebody says, even with a good sense of humor, what I get stressed at is when somebody gives me a job to do and then they ask me to go help somebody else. That really stresses. Well, then that doesn't work in a company that's,
big red flag. Yeah.
Well, it's good for some companies, but we don't have a stovepipe structure. We have a collaborative, everybody jump in and paddle the boat.
Get the job done. Yeah. Awesome. Well, Marty, you've been very, very generous with your time. Thank you for that. We always have one last question we ask all our guests, and that's kind of what career life advice you'd give to someone who maybe has their eyes on the corner office someday.
I would seek out every possible learning leadership experience you can. And you don't have to be young to do this, and it's not something you do when you're young and then you stop because you think you've arrived. Nonprofits need leadership. Supervising anything is still a form of leadership. So seek out actual physical, tactile experiences, either by volunteering within your own organization or business or company, but also there's opportunities out there all over the place in organizations. And do it for that reason. Say, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to figure out, like if you were a fighter, you'd seek out people to spar against, to become better, to learn your weaknesses, and then figure out how to correct your weaknesses. The second thing is become a student of leadership and understand that there's lots of people that have gone before you. They've written a lot of good things down. The Jack Welches of the world. There's a lot of good books, and you can learn and live what other leaders have experienced and how they've ascended and how they've grown and how they've moved either laterally before they went up or very quickly in a parabolic way straight up. And you see the pros and the cons of both of those experiences, and you see the tricks and the tips of surviving that process and how do you ascend to the highest and best use you can possibly ascend to. That's probably the two tangible ways somebody listening to this could go out there tomorrow and start affecting their potential and the probability of them moving into the corner office.
Their future. Great. Well, Marty Strong, CEO and Chief Strategy Officer of LGS Management Group, thank you so much for sharing your journey into the corner office.
Thanks, Brent.
Thank you for listening to Into the Corner Office with Brant Hanley. We hope you enjoyed hearing our guest CEO story as much as we did. If you want to hear more CEOs reveal their journey into the corner office, please subscribe via iTunes and tell your friends and colleagues. For more information about Brant, Resource Options International, and the mighty middle market, visit www.go4roi.com. We look forward to having you join us for our next episode.